Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition Around the Round Table. We have Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dice, and we're going to get into a number of issues. Gun control certainly will be front and center because of some of the things that have transpired this week. You had the CNN town hall meeting. Love to get some comments around the round table on that. But also, as we have talked about, especially we focused a lot of time and attention on it yesterday, the loss of Billy Graham. We had William Martin on, who is the biographer of Billy Graham, and he has the book that came out in 1991, A Prophet Without Honor, added 4 new chapters. It's coming out in about a week or two from Zondervan, so that was good to talk about that. And as we go around the round table, I thought I might get some initial comments about that. We'll get into Billy Graham a little bit more later. But Kelly Shackelford, when I say Billy Graham, that certainly brings up all sorts of memories for you, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, that day when that happened, I was on my way to the airport. I had to fly out of town and actually give a speech and some other meetings after that, and all the flights were canceled because of bad weather. And so I actually had to drive my car for 4 hours. And as I was driving, I heard the news, and I kept hearing for hours. I heard all these people come on and talk about what Billy Graham had meant to them, how their whole family, people that we see on TV, how their whole family, for instance, had come to know the Lord because of Billy Graham. And it was it was just powerful to listen to. And the thing that came to my mind of all things is I thought, who's next? I mean, who's some of the other treasures that we have still with us? And I don't know, for whatever reason, one of the guys that came to my mind was Charles Stanley. Mm-hmm. And it just reminded me, because Charles Stanley, he's been a supporter of First Liberty for years. And one time, I guess about a year ago now, I called him and just thanked him for a gift. And I said, Dr. Stanley, the only reason I do what I do is so you can do what you do. And he responded in, true tone. He said, I understand that. He said, so you keep doing what you're doing, because I plan to keep doing what I'm doing. And it just kind of hit me, the whole Billy Graham. I thought, fighting for religious freedom, so just one person can share and do what they can do. I mean, look at what Billy Graham did. And I think all of us have that ability, just the ripples, from the pebble hitting the water. Each of us can have just a huge impact because of the people we impact and the people they impact. And it just reminded me, it was just nice to be reminded of something really good in this country, something that really does make a real difference, and what is going to make a difference as to whether our country is turned around or goes in the wrong direction.
Again, a man that was a counselor to 12 different presidents, from Harry Truman all the way to Barack Obama. Somebody asked the other day, well, did he ever meet with Barack Obama? And if you go to USA Today, there's a picture of Barack Obama meeting him at his home. So certainly not as significant as some of the others, but I don't know of anybody that's had that kind of influence or ever will again. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Jeremy, is when we had the Millennial Roundtable the other day, not one of them had been to a Billy Graham crusade, and not one of them had seen a Billy Graham television program. And I thought, okay, for the younger generation, we almost have to reintroduce him to some of the individuals. Maybe not you, but many of your peers.
Yeah, no, thankfully, I did grow up watching the Billy Graham crusades on TV. I remember very well sitting in my parents' living room watching those things with Mom and Dad, and being in awe of the man who could hold 50, 60,000 people in a stadium. at the tip of his fingers on his every word. It was a remarkable gift that he had been given to be able to speak so well and to carry such a professional air about him. But yeah, no, it's important for us to remember who this guy was. And Kelly was right to point out. I was thinking, as he was thinking those things, my thoughts were, could this happen today? You know, you think about almost every major stadium that has been released. We're just a few miles down the road from what we call Jerry World here in Dallas, the Cowboy Stadium. The very first event there was a Billy Graham crusade. Billy Graham opened most of those big stadiums with his crusades or something like that, or they would ask him to come to that. In fact, we have a case right now that originated in the Citrus Bowl. Two Christian schools playing. They had a prayer there. The very first event there was Billy Graham preaching in that stadium. I wonder if we can still do that still today. I mean, we have all these question marks now. For instance, we've gone from the Citrus Bowl being a place where Billy Graham opened up, preaching his faith very clearly from that stadium owned by the city of Orlando, to now, fast forward, we're going to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals defending two Christian schools who were told they couldn't pray over the loudspeaker at that very same stadium. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Yes. Well, again, if there is an heir apparent, really, there's never another Billy Graham out there. But certainly Greg Laurie has been able to fill a number of baseball ballparks and a few stadiums, but very, very few. And so, again, we wanted to spend some time. We may, in the second hour, get into that in a little more detail. But you might notice that we posted some articles, and I thought I might just mention the last article that we've posted here, which came about because it's talking about the legacy of Billy Graham. And this comes from Samuel Rodriguez, which I thought was very interesting. And again, saying one of the most influential and perhaps the most influential evangelists since the Apostle Paul. So there have been a lot of accolades, but back to the point you guys have both made, he's a lot more controversial than he was back then. You know, I've seen some really horrible things said because he's anti-LGBT, you know, and it used to be that a person that was talking about a Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana wouldn't get the kind of criticism that the former governor, now vice president, got. And Franklin Graham and Billy Graham criticized simply because they supported traditional marriage in North Carolina.
Yeah, and I think this is, you know, I know we're going to talk about the gun control things
Sure.
and all that, and I think there's a tie-in to a lot of this. I think I think what's behind a lot of the things that are going on in our country is just this lack of civility.
Yes.
And this is sort of the game that's played now. It's if you don't agree with me, then I have to destroy you, which was never America before, but it's kind of become, you know, the way things go right now, and almost everybody feels like they have to play that game. And, you know, that's what leads to a society where, you know, madmen go in and shoot up and kill people. I just think the lack of just basic, you know, civility and how we even talk to each other has an influence on that.
Well, again, that's one of the reasons, Jeremy, we talk about trying to provide a forum here, a point of view, so people can have a chance to hear some things they might not hear elsewhere, and hopefully communicate in a way that shows truth but also love.
Yeah. You know, and you know my backstory about having grown up on Point of View, listening to it in my mom's van as we waited for my sister to get out of choir practice. But that's where I learned how to have these arguments. And maybe that was why I became a lawyer, because I kept on arguing. It's all your fault, Kirby, why I'm a lawyer now, I guess.
And Kelly's.
Exactly. But, you know, this is where we're able to sit through and think through these ideas. And sadly, not enough people do that. I wish more people would listen to Point of View and other shows so that they would think through these issues on a daily basis and argue back with us on the radio, whether that's on a phone call or if it's just arguing with, you know, your kid brother in the van while your sister's out there waiting for practice to get over or whatever it is. Think through these issues and think through them deeply.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we encourage you to participate in our conversation. And, of course, I mentioned one of the articles we posted, but I'm going to come back to this one by David French. Gun control debate could break America. Kelly sort of alluded to that. We are talking today about, of course, the issue of gun control and gun rights and all that, but there's a bigger issue if indeed we can't even communicate with one another and we monsterize each other, to use a phrase that David Brooks uses. Can we demonsterize that and add some civility? So we'll talk about that and then open it up for your calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
If you've ever listened to Dennis Prager's radio program, you know that he often talks about the difference between liberals and conservatives. And you would also know that he dedicates 1 hour to what he calls the happiness hour, where he explores why people are happy or unhappy. So it's not surprising that he recently wrote a commentary on the subject, Liberals and Conservatives Are Unhappy for Different Reasons. He says that unhappy conservatives generally believe they are unhappy because life is difficult or tragic or because they made some unwise decisions in life. Liberals are unhappy generally because they believe they have been persecuted. A left-wing woman may attribute her unhappiness to American society's patriarchy or misogyny. She therefore feels oppressed. He also argues that the more left-wing blacks will attribute his or her unhappiness to racism. He has noticed that black conservatives have a much happier disposition than left-wing blacks. He's also found that a cheerful black caller to his radio program is almost always a conservative. Near the end of his commentary, he gives a personal example. His father, an Orthodox Jew, wrote his college senior thesis on the subject of anti-Semitism in America. His father was well aware of bigotry in this country, but still reminded Dennis Prager and his brother that American Jews are the luckiest Jews in history because they're Americans. Prager says, "I therefore never knew what it was like to walk around thinking most of the people I met hated me. That alone contributed to my happiness." He correctly concludes that unhappy Americans on the right blame the problems inherent to life and blame themselves. Unhappy Americans on the left blame America. This simple formula explains so much. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13. Samson, now playing. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Kelly and Jeremy are here today, and of course they're with First Liberty. We have some links, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because again, encourage you to support First Liberty Institute. But let's, if we can, get into the gun control debate and the gun rights debate. And there are going to be a couple of ways we can do this. First of all, as I mentioned, there's an article by David French, "Will Gun Control Debate Break America?" The second one is on the CNN Town Hall. Kelly, you don't watch CNN very often, but I understand that you had a chance to watch that. And I love the way David French talks about it. He said it's almost as if it was like the clip from George Orwell's novel 1984, where they have 2 minutes of hate. And the other night when Tucker Carlson turned it on, he said, "Here, we'll go to the CNN debate." Actually, they went to a black and white film of 1984. He said, "Oh, no, that was my mistake." But really, I don't know that I've seen so much hate in a forum like that in some time. What was your experience since you watched it?
I couldn't believe what I was watching. I was really disgusted. I kept waiting for somebody. I mean, what should have been is CNN, but they obviously didn't do it. But I mean, this and what hit me eventually is I just thought, this is why, everybody's looking for, how to stop this or why this is occurring. And to me, I mean, you hate to say this because there were people there whose children were killed, but the very conduct they engaged in is exactly why. It's okay to hate people. It's okay to just treat people horribly if I disagree with them. And that's exactly the kind of whole atmosphere, mindset, add a little bit of derangement that leads to these kind of killings. This is what's happening in our society. Look, you had all these people. Number one, I mean, they must have just stacked it with one side. I mean, they weren't trying to have a balanced discussion. But even in the midst of that, the fact that Senator Rubio agreed to come in and answer questions, and that Dana Lash from the NRA did so, you thought that at least, okay, well, that's even though they're outnumbered, 10,000 to 1 or 15,000 to 1, at least maybe there'll be a discussion. And instead, it was like, whenever they tried to answer, they were treated disrespectffully. Even the students, treating like a U.S. senator disrespectfully. The way the questions were worded were, to me, if I had a student that asked a question like that, I would say, you can leave the class now because we don't act that way as a grown-up, and you're obviously not prepared to be a grown-up. Instead, they clapped and cheered. So they cheered, immoral conduct and hatefulness. And what I really thought was the left always wants to be against bullying. They were bullies. It was the ultimate bullying, because they could not stand to be in a discussion where you exchanged ideas. And I thought it was everything about that of what's wrong with America and what is anti-American. We're supposed to be the marketplace of ideas where we seek the truth. Instead, that was a pool of hate and vindictiveness and incivility. And I was just waiting for somebody to stand up and call those people out, and it didn't happen because they were all from the same immoral pool. And it was sad. It was sad to watch that not anybody in there stood up and said, "Stop it. This is wrong. This is not how we treat people."
Jeremy, any comments?
Well, yeah, I had the thought that there are several stages of grief, right? And it starts off with anger, and eventually it goes to acceptance. And I think we are firm in the middle of the first step still. And you add into that a general lack of maturity that is unfortunately out there right now. I mean, it's not just the students who are understandably immature. They're still young kids, still learning a lot, even though they know much. Or they think they know more than they actually know, but they're still learning. But like Kelly, I was wondering, where are the adults in the room? And what we find out is you got adults, quote unquote, like Lawrence Tribe, that are saying, "Hey, these kids need to be given the right to vote at 16." And I saw one mother say, "My kid sat down for breakfast and thought it was a good idea to eat an entire pecan pie for breakfast. He's 16. We want to give him the right to vote." Maybe there's some maturity that needs to go on here yet. This is where we find ourselves out. But that's exactly right. And as David points out in his article that I think you linked to here, his last line: a nation cannot endure forever when its people are consumed with such hate. And this has been growing and growing and growing. Not just the frustration and anger over why these school shootings continue to happen or public shootings continue to happen. That's understandable. I know why we're having those kind of frustrations. But now everything is at an absolute crescendoed, fevered pitch for everything, whether it's the shootings or whether it's a political issue du jour. Everything is always at fortissimissimo, right? I mean, it's at the very highest, loudest, strongest argument that you can possibly make on things. That's not good for us as a society. Eventually, something's going to burst in our neck or something like that, where we're just going to topple over as a country.
Well, and again, one of the things he also says in that article is, we can have some debates and maybe even sometimes unreasonable debates about net neutrality or tax reform or whatever. This one cuts to the core of life and death, which maybe gives people even more of an excuse, Kelly, to say some hateful kinds of things. But I think there's an argument that's broader than just the gun control debate, and that is we live in a world today where people are very isolated and are, in many cases, especially our liberal friends, are oftentimes in a bubble. And there's a study that has been done asking all sorts of questions, and you have people that are in the East Coast. They've never been to a Walmart. They've never been around anybody that's ever owned a gun. They've never even seen a pickup truck except on television. Well, that doesn't exactly relate to a lot of middle America, and the people in middle America maybe have gone to New York City once, but they don't understand some of this. And so there is a real, if you will, cultural clash as well as just a policy clash, isn't there?
There is. But I think what was going on, certainly, number one, CNN is a disgrace. when you have a forum like that and you invite people in to have the sides, you don't allow people to scream, and so that nobody can answer. I mean, this is the kind of college stuff where they shout the conservative speaker down and don't let him speak. That's not an exchange of ideas. But what's really going on? I mean, I just think this is a picture of, like Jeremy's talking about, in all of these issues. It's sort of the ultimate message is emotion is God and truth and logic are the enemy. I mean, nobody wanted to listen, consider the ideas, say why they're right or wrong. It was all spewing, of hate and really horrible things, I mean, Dana Lash, screaming that she's a murderer or that, I mean, she didn't have anything to do with this, and saying to burn her, I mean, as she's leaving with a security detail. She has to leave with a security detail. That should tell you there's something wrong with you people.
And she said she would not have gotten out there. That's our second article. She would not have been able to get out of there without a security detail. Even now, in another article, which I didn't post, she says when I came in, it was like coming into a fight, like an MMA or something like that. They're brought down the aisle, and there are people shouting at them even before she said anything.
Yeah. And they're saying things that are horrible things. So it's that. I just wish the country would rise up against that and just say, no, we don't accept this kind of conduct in this country, because that's what leads to these problems where if you feel like it's okay and it's justified, then it just gets worse. I mean, hate leads to, there's a list, but you eventually end up at murder. I mean, that's sort of the continuation of where that leads.
And that's why the government is so important to be protecting the right for us to be able to have these differences of opinion. Because when the government doesn't protect that right, it leads to this kind of a thing. There's no space right now to have any kind of crescendo from a public policy debate over net neutrality. Everybody who opposes net neutrality is Hitler.
Yeah.
Right. You are awful, evil, and to be deposed.
And now it's the end of the internet as we know it.
Where do you go from there?
Yeah.
and it's a serious point. Where do you go from net neutrality, everyone's a Hitler, to this?
Yeah.
Where there literally is life or death on the line. There's no room for that. And so the only thing that you can go from ad Hitlerum is to go get a noose and hang Dana Lash. That's as far as you can go. Yeah. And that's wrong. But we've seen this in other contexts as well. When the state of Oregon failed to protect Aaron and Melissa Klein, what results from that? Nasty, horrible death threats and social media posts on Aaron and Melissa Klein's private accounts to wish that their kids would get cancer and die. This is why we have laws, but the laws are only good as the people who are going to enforce them and the morality that will support them.
Well, let's take a break, and we would love to get your comments. There are some policy implications of all that, but we've looked at least kind of the cultural issues. So if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly and Jeremy in studio with us today. It is our weekend edition, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll be back right after this.
From PureFlix comes Samson, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, from his anointing to betrayal to redemption.
My name is Samson, and you will face the wrath of God.
Samson, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at samson.movie.
Missing a day of point of view is like Samson losing his hair. Now stay with me. Without his hair, Samson was weak, and ultimately he lost his sight. Without point of view, you miss out on encouraging news, stories of how God is using Christians to make a difference. Instead of being strengthened, you get discouraged. And point of view helps you see places to get involved, opportunities to apply your God-given gifts for good. Never miss a program, a Viewpoints commentary, an important action item when you download the Point of View radio app, free from Google Play or iTunes. Take out your phone right now and download the Point of View radio app. See the difference you can make.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Are you concerned about the politicized culture that we live in? As a matter of fact, that's one of the booklets we've been making available, the politicized culture that we are finding ourselves in, and the division in America. But let's also get into some of the specifics. Senator Marco Rubio at one point tried to explain that if you really even wanted to ban AR-15s, not going to happen, but okay, let's go down the logic for this for just a minute. And you ban it because it has magazines or it has the ability to be fired repeatedly as a semi-automatic weapon. that essentially you'd have to ban all semi-automatic weapons. Kelly Shackelford, as soon as he said that, the cheers went up. And I'm thinking, yes, we're always told that, no, we don't want to take away your guns. But I think that group is certainly one that would want to. And I'm thinking anybody that watches that already sort of agrees with that might be naively thinking that, yeah, we can get another assault weapons ban. Matter of fact, we could ban all semi-automatic weapons and actually be taking the wrong piece of advice from the crowd that was gathered there for the CNN town hall.
Yeah, well, watch the Democrats propose that. Not
yes,
that's
they'd be smart not to.
Yeah,
I think.
That's not going to work, and they're not going to propose that. All that did is reveal how completely extreme the crowd was, and or clueless, probably a little bit of both. But, yeah, that's something, no Democrats were saying that. We're going to take away any gun that, has any magazine or anything else. And that, but there are people that's what they really want. They want all the guns taken away because they think it'll be safer. And just the police have the guns. And, of course, that's why we have a Second Amendment, because our founders said, no, that's not the way, you have to have weapons or else the government will control you. And so, there's 300 million weapons, I think, over 300 million guns. So they're not going to go away. So you got to figure out a way to deal with this otherwise. And the thing that's so weird about this whole thing to me is think of all the places we go where there's security. I mean, you can't go into a courthouse without security. You can't go into the airport. You can't go, and yet the schools is the one place. It just doesn't make sense that everything we supposedly value, we have security, except for our children.
Yeah.
So it's really bizarre that we're even in this situation.
Jeremy, one of the things that people have been saying is if you're going to have a gun-free zone, then you have to guarantee that it's gun-free. Okay, a courtroom is a gun-free zone. You've been in many of those. How do you get into a courtroom? You go through what? A metal detector. Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of people saying, I don't know if I want to have a metal detector at the schools. That would send the wrong signal. But if you're going to have a true gun-free zone, you've got to guarantee that there are no guns there, right?
I would imagine so. And the problem is that the law-abiding people are the ones that actually follow the laws, that there will be no guns in that zone there. But the unlaw-abiding ones, the ones that refuse to follow the law, that sign doesn't make a difference to them. And that's going to become a problem. And that's where we get back to the human nature element that's at stake on all of this. We can't just simply say we want to live in a nirvana in which there is no evil. I mean, I hearken back to Archie Bunker so many years ago when his daughter wondered about, all the gun violence that's out there, and he wondered, would it make him feel any better if they was all killed with knives? Mm-hmm. It doesn't make us all feel better. The problem is not the inanimate object, it's the person who's using that inanimate object. Take reasonable steps, we understand that. There are reasonably good solutions. David French has put forward another great idea called the gun violence restraining order. That's a great thing to be looking at. That's certainly worthwhile and something that is within a system that is already working like that. We could have done that. We had the police officer that was outside this very building who himself could have stepped in and helped but did not. Why? We need to figure that out. And appropriately, that sheriff has rained on that guy's parade quite a bit today, and appropriately so. The FBI had some significant missteps on things. Why aren't we having heads rolling at the FBI for that? They've been too busy looking at other things for the last 18 months. That's probably part of the reason here. And then, one of the things that many of these school shooters seem to have in common is a home that is fatherless. That is leading to tremendous and horrible results. And let's not forget that human toll that's taking place here. This young man certainly has issues, not all of which are external to himself. He's responsible for what he has done. But let's analyze and see what has happened, and let's evaluate again, is it a good idea for kids to grow up without dad?
Yeah. And again, what about this one, Kelly? I want to come back to you because Scott Peterson is the name of that particular individual who was tasked to actually go in and prevent this and never did. And you, on the last time we talked about this, talked about 39 visits to the home. We talked about alerts from a number of different places to the FBI. One of the things that was raised at the CNN town hall meeting, but certainly got sort of shouted down, is it may not be a problem with the NRA, it may not be a problem with the AR-15, but it may be a problem with both federal, state, and local law enforcement. What about that?
Well, I mean, I think there's definitely improvement that needs to be done there. I mean, in this case, I'm baffled by this person who worked for the police who was outside the building and did not go in when this happened, yet they called in to report and gave a description of the gunman. I mean, he knew who he was, what he looked like, and he didn't go in and do anything. I'd really like to understand the explanation for that. And I've seen one report that shows that the school district and the sheriff actually were in some sort of tussle because they kept having incidents where people were arrested, and so the school district asked them not to arrest people and not to come and do things because it looked bad. Mm-hmm. Is that why the guy didn't go in? I mean, I would hope not. But so they need to look at all that. The FBI, getting obviously a report that somebody said this guy said he's going to, go and shoot up a school and all this, and that they didn't follow up. That's obviously a serious issue. But I think there's even issues with reporting. We have these background checks for people getting guns. And there's a system, but for instance, it's kind of up to the states as to whether they report these things. So literally you can have somebody adjudicated mentally ill, and there's, I don't know how many states it is, whether it's 12, 14, whatever, but won't even show up in the database if you're from a number of the states. I mean, that needs to change. The background checks needs to, if somebody has got violence or mental illness and these type of things, there needs to be a much better system because that's the only way David French is, going and getting some sort of restraining order to take the guns away from somebody. They got to have that kind of information. And if it's not being shared in a way where you have access to it when somebody's trying to seek a gun, then it's not going to be very helpful.
Well, again, we saw in Sutherland Springs, if the Air Force had reported, that might have been one as well. We've got lots of phone calls, as you might imagine. So along the way, we'll take a call as we are talking with Kelly and Jeremy today. Let's head to Georgia first on the Good News Network. And Priscilla, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, hi there. I was thinking about the right to bear arms, and if we didn't have that right, I really believe that other countries in the last maybe 60, 70 years have thought about the fact that our citizenry have weapons, and that's another tactic they have to think about. I mean, you can bomb and all that, but it would be worse than ISIS or going in Iraq or any place like that, or even Iran, because their citizens don't have guns, but we do. And just like I was thinking about that, how we fought against the British, and they had hose and everything else to fight.
Well, one of the things that you've heard before, and I'm beginning to wonder if it's true, but there was, at least back in World War II, the argument that one of the Japanese leaders said, we never want to invade the U.S. mainland because they're armed. Now, some people think that's just apocryphal, but whether it was said or whether it was thought, that is certainly an aspect of this. An armed citizenry is a little harder to subdue, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a huge issue, obviously. So it's a deterrent in that way, and it's also, the founders, one of the main reasons, obviously, is it's the ability to make sure your own government doesn't, become oppressive, and that temptation isn't there for the government.
And one of the teachers wanted Dana to explain what a well-regulated militia was, and I thought she did a relatively good job given the fact that they were boos. I've been in situations where people are booing the whole time you're talking. Sometimes you can't even hear yourself say what you said. So, again, that's another difficulty. But let's take a break, and I want to go around the round table again, but also got some other phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We talked about a couple of issues, and Jeremy's put one good on the table. What about that? He's talked about, absent fathers, broken homes. Can we add one more? Video games. Mm-hmm. We've talked with David Grossman in the past about this. And when you watch lots of violence and you do point-and-shoot video games, maybe not everybody, but maybe a small percentage, think about doing that in real life. Let's take a break and get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
President Trump has been reversing destructive policies and replacing radical appointees put in place by his predecessor. He missed one opportunity in nominating Hy Feldblum to serve a third term, a 5-year term, on the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. The Conservative Review calls her the previous administration's most radical sexual identity movement leader. The EEOC was created under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to combat workplace discrimination. The agency is often called upon to adjudicate struggles between our constitutional freedom of religion and gay rights in the workplace. It tends not to wait for the courts, but to push ahead with its own ideological preferences. Conservative Review's editor Daniel Horowitz describes today's EEOC as the tip of the spear of the radical racial sexual identity movements. He points out that they apply the laws unequally for classes of citizens loved by the American left at the expense of the classes out of favor with the political elites. Hy Feldblum's renomination is terrible news for all businesses that operate according to religious convictions. Ms. Feldblum, an open lesbian and former Georgetown University law professor, has publicly advocated that sex discrimination in current law be redefined to include sexual orientation and gender identity. She was a lead architect of President Obama's transgender directive for public schools. She was an author of ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. She believes that religious liberty exemptions should be extremely narrow, and famously answered a question about the rights of Christians to hire employees of their own choosing with the phrase, "Gays win, Christians lose." She wrote, "We are in a zero-sum game. A gain for one side necessarily entails a corresponding loss for the other side. In these questions," she continued, "I am convinced society should come down on the side of protecting the liberty of LGBT people. The administration should withdraw this nomination and find a more mainstream candidate for the EEOC." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly and Jeremy in studio. By the way, you can watch online. You can also, of course, go to Facebook Live and see that as well. I mentioned just a minute ago David Grossman. Colonel Grossman has been on this program many times before. In my book, Technology and Social Trends, Chapter 15 is entitled Kids Killing Kids. It's really kind of a summary of some of the interviews we've done with him. And here is an individual who was really wondering how this all played out, because he had actually written about the whole subject of on-killing, which as a textbook actually used at West Point. And then as he started seeing these video games, he said, you know, some of these video games are just almost like training videos for people that want to go in and shoot. And then, of course, actually provided expert testimony in one of the cases in Paducah, Kentucky, from a young man that had really never shot a gun until that weekend. But then when he goes and kills all these kids, it's all headshots, just like it was in the video games. Now, does it mean every kid that plays a point-and-shoot video game is going to be a killer? No. But I think it illustrates, again, Jeremy, one of the other issues you said, breakdown of the family, video games, lots of violence on television and movies. You add that toxic mix together, and you end up with what we are in right now.
Yeah, you do. And garbage in, garbage out, as Mom used to say all the time. And that's certainly going to have that effect. I mean, correlation is not causation.
True.
But there are a lot of reasons to be careful about what we put into our minds and into our bodies. There's warnings in Scripture all over that. You know, I should be a better basketball player today for all the video games I played on basketball, but apparently that didn't correlate to that causation either. But, you know, if we're constantly seeking violence out on our entertainment, what are we going to be inclined to be doing?
Yes.
Instead, if we're putting things that are right, pure, just, and holy into our minds and our hearts, maybe we'd be more right, just, and holy people. But that's not the way that we find ourselves acting today. And a large measure of that is because we're abdicating a lot of that responsibility as parents to other sources, be that our teachers, who are excellent people, but they're not mom and dad to my children. Maybe we're abdicating that to other areas that we're not even aware of. Even youth groups can become a problem for parents if they're not controlling that aspect of things. So it's good for parents. It's necessary for parents. Kids need the parents to be providing to them that instruction and direction that will make them more successful adults.
So as a man thinketh, so he is.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's one of the more powerful scriptures, because I think it's so true. I mean, I think I saw just this last week a new study about how if you complain and if you think those kinds of negative thoughts, what happens to your brain, your health, your
yes.
And so, of course, and the intensity of the video games is pretty strong. And so, of course, the more things we see, we ingest, we think about that are not good, pure, holy, redeeming, etc., then not only are we going to suffer, but those around us will suffer too, because we will bring that, whole attitude. But I think it'd be better if people realize just, so as a man thinketh, so he is. I mean, that we would think, I think I want to think about better things. I think I want to be careful about, what I put my eyes on, even the words I declare. I mean, I think there's some power God talks about. And I think, for instance, when President Trump got up, whatever his own personal relationship with the Lord is, I think when he stands up as the President of the United States and mentions God in a declaratory way, saying in God we trust, and all the things he did in the State of the Union, I think that makes a difference in our culture. And I think we need more of the positive things, more of those things, and less of these negative things. I think the negative things is what leads to this hostility, this, but the thing that as a lawyer just kills me because I'm logical is how completely hypocritical. I mean, bullying is bad, but not if you're wrong on gun control, and
or any other issue.
Yeah, and it's like everything, you should be tolerant, but I'm not going to tolerate you if you don't believe like I do. I mean, you just see all these things and you go, wow. I mean, your brain's not working. And it's because this culture of just emotion over logic and truth, and so if I'm really emotional about it, and this is why Jeremy's talking about one of the articles you posted. You got people like Lawrence Tribe, a constitutional professor, saying these kids are so good, from this tragedy that they should have a right to vote. And it's like what he's really saying is these kids are so emotional about an issue I agree with them on. Anybody with any 2 cents knows, well, they don't have enough life experience. They don't, I feel really bad for them because I feel like they're being used.
Yes. I think so.
Because I think, what should a real education in this situation be in a school after this happens? Here's what I would think would be great if I was the headmaster of a school or something like this happened. You'd go through the grieving, all that, and then you'd probably have like an open session, and you'd bring experts with all the different solutions, and you'd lay them out. You'd have people say why those solutions are not good, and what would happen is all those kids would begin to understand this is a lot more complicated than I realized, and that would be an education. And I think you'd find some things that everybody could agree on that would help, but you couldn't just throw out these emotional statements and think that you'd done anything. That's what real education should be about, is learning about the different approaches and what are the positives and negatives of each approach.
Let's give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. We've got a full bank of phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Arizona. Jeannie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What's your point of view?
Thank you very much for the gentleman. I've just turned the radio on, so I missed most of your program. I apologize. But I agree with what he said 100%. But what I'd like to say is that I'm English. and I've lived there like 35, 37 years, born there, and we don't have guns, and I believe the guns are a decoy. And with all humility, I would request that we really start preaching. Please get the Bibles back in school. Get the Bibles back, and the guns. If you don't have guns, we have no defense. For example, I was saying to the gentleman, we have no guns in England, and I was robbed every 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
We'd wait for the insurance to repay, and they would be back and rob our house because they were laughing at us because we had no defense, because we had no guns. And it's not that I really want a gun particularly, but if they don't know I do or I don't, then I have some kind of defense. But the guns are a decoy. They're just a decoy. So let's get off the guns, because we need the guns. We need our amendment rights. And we need to get the Bibles back, because the gentleman said, as a man thinks, so is he. And words that we declare are really, really powerful. The shooter said that himself. But unless the Lord guard the fort, the sentries labor in vain. And when we get the Word of God into the children, and they understand, and they realize it's not about them, it's about Jesus, then the world will start, our kids will start to turn around.
Well, again, you're talking to two lawyers here that work with First Liberty and certainly believe in religious liberty. Let me also mention one of the other articles that we posted earlier in the week by, again, it's amazing how many times we post articles by David French. Assault weapons preserve the purpose of the Second Amendment, pointing out that when you say, well, I want to disarm individuals, or I not give them the same kind of firepower that an intruder or a burglar or a rapist would have, then you're obviously making them less successful. Jeannie gives us a great illustration from England. We have to take a break, though, and we'll come back, and I'll get some comments around the round table. And those of you waiting online, we've got a full bank of phone calls, so we'll do our best to get some of your comments. And if you want to read some of these articles we've posted either today or this week, all available at the website, pointofview.net. Also have a link to First Liberty Institute. We'll talk more about the need for you to support religious liberty right after these important messages.
With the way things are going right now, there's got to be a source of truth somewhere.
Eric lives in California, and he's listened to Point of View since he was a child hanging around his dad's auto shop in Nevada. He says it's his only trustworthy source of information about what's happening in the world.
Well, I feel bad because I have not been donating, and I'll tell you what, I'm getting back to that because just recently I realized with all the junk going on, with all the media, with all these news things, the only one that I count on is you guys, and what would I do if you guys weren't there? I don't know what I'd do. Where would I get my news? And I would be dead in water. So I got to do my part.
Make sure you do your part, like Eric. Join the Truth Team. Get all the details by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team. Support the truth and make a difference for the future. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Both of our individuals today, Kelly and Jeremy, are with the First Liberty Institute. Before we are done today, we're going to talk about some great resources there. And even in the last hour, when we talked with Jeannie about getting the Bibles back into the school, but even more so, just getting some religious perspective and share, really, in a sense. Kelly, let me use that right now to talk about First Liberty for just a minute. We have this mindset today that has been perpetuated by our friends up there in Wisconsin, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. There's a new leader of the Americans for Separation of Church and State, and they all just say we should never have anything religious or moral in the schools, and I think we're reaping some of the very bad harvest from actually excluding Bible and moral values in the schools, don't you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not going to be a vacuum, right? If God is removed, something will fill that void, and I don't think we'll like it, and we're not liking it. The good news is that there is incredible freedom to have God in the schools. It's just a matter of people being willing to take God with them and to share with them. I mean, I think if we see anything of this past week that's really powerful, it's not what this, deranged person did. It's Billy Graham's life and how many lives he impacted. I mean, it's just beyond the imagination to think of all the lives that were impacted. And that wasn't because of anything but him speaking the truth. And everybody can do that, at their schools. I mean, students have a right to free speech. They have a right to share their faith. They have a right to form Bible clubs or Christian clubs. They have a right to use their faith in their assignments. We could go on and on and on. One of my children is about to graduate from school and from high school, and before he does, he's going to a baccalaureate service. And you think, well, gosh, I thought that's a religious service. It is. You mean you can do that? Yeah, you can do it if you do it in the right way. And I would even say, for instance, if you're out there and there's no baccalaureate service, and it could even be your junior high school or whatever, when people graduate, they like something of significance, play something of faith is a perfect, and that's why we've had baccalaureate services. Well, you say, well, the school can't do it because the school can't push religion. Okay, have the ministers in that community say, we'd like to rent the gymnasium that's been rented out to other people, so you can't stop us from renting it. Equal Access Act have to allow us the same ability, not act, but just equal access to law. So we're going to rent it. Okay, now they've rented the gymnasium for a baccalaureate service. Then they can invite every single person about to graduate, free speech. Okay, they can have them there, and then this is not a school event, right? This is by those ministers. They can, and I'm saying this because I've seen this done. They can then have an altar call at the end of the baccalaureate.
Wow.
And, people come to know the Lord. So there are so many of these opportunities. We don't live in the former USSR, okay? We actually have religious freedom if we're willing to exercise it. And so people just need to not be intimidated out of sort of pulling God out of the schools. Let's take God back into the schools. Let's impact people's lives by bringing the truth. The freedoms are there. And we have, at First Liberty, we've got a little pamphlet on what are your rights as a student, or what are your rights as a teacher in the schools. We have those kinds of things if people need them, or they can just call. But we need to be much more creative and intentional about that, or we'll have more of these situations. If that was going on there, maybe this kid who ended up doing this, maybe he would have been reached 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe his life would have been changed. Maybe somebody would have reached out to him.
Might have.
And we could avoid a lot more of these in the future. And in fact, we could change the country. Maybe a whole youth movement would start if this happened in the schools. So there are great opportunities if we're willing to walk into those opportunities.
If you go to firstliberty.org and click on resources, then you'll find them for various resource pamphlets that you have. One of those, Chelsea, who's been with us before, actually took the time to summarize some of that and put it in the last issue of Outlook magazine, which then also links back to First Liberty. So go to firstliberty.org if you're looking for some of that advice. Or if you find yourself, Jeremy, in a situation where you tried to do that and were told that you couldn't put scripture verses on a banner that the football team runs through, or you were told you could not pray before a Christian football championship, some of the cases that you've been involved with, that's why they call you, right?
And I hope they will call us. These are the fun cases for us to be able to come together and to be able to explain what the law is nationwide. We've got a very good track record of success with that. We work with some of the greatest attorneys in this country to be able to make these cases successful. And so, I would encourage you to go to firstliberty.org, download all these resources for you, learn what your rights are so that you know when you need to call us.
And again, great resources for the military, for your workplace, for school, and much, much more. Let's go to some of the phone calls here. Some of you have waited a long time. Bob in Georgia, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
How you doing, Kerby?
I'm good. What's on your mind?
Good. I just want to make a point. I think the responsibility lies at the foot of the church. It is our responsibility. If the church, if all the true Christians in America were standing up and being a good example of Christ-likeness in their communities, in their homes, how they raise their children, how they vote, how they do everything, we wouldn't have this problem. And that's one point. The main point is that it's an American condition, and I think that responsibility lies at the foot of the church, because we don't ever react until something happens. We sit around like a bunch of I don't know what, and
so we need to be proactive. Is that what you're saying? We need to be proactive.
Knowing that things are all wrong and letting them continue.
Yeah.
And that is why things like this happen, and it's exasperating. Americans need to wake up, and the church needs to wake up and not be afraid to stand up and speak the truth. So, we need, in my opinion, I'm single. I'm 61 years old. I've never had any children. And I'm single. I didn't get saved till 7 years ago. But if I had any children, they sure wouldn't be going to a public school. I promise you that.
Well, and again, you're talking about the importance of speaking out. Kelly, you've talked about that as well. If we had more Christians stand up, more Christians assert their religious liberty rights, we'd be in a lot better situation, wouldn't we?
Well, yeah, we've obviously, as a culture, kind of moved away from God, and so we're seeing the consequences when you push God out of the culture. And so I think most people know we need God in the culture. We need more Billy Grahams, and we'll have less of these tragedies, certainly.
We'll take a break and take some more phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
If you've ever listened to Dennis Prager's radio program, you know that he often talks about the difference between liberals and conservatives. And you would also know that he dedicates 1 hour to what he calls the happiness hour, where he explores why people are happy or unhappy. So it's not surprising that he recently wrote a commentary on the subject, Liberals and Conservatives Are Unhappy for Different Reasons. He says that unhappy conservatives generally believe they are unhappy because life is difficult or tragic or because they made some unwise decisions in life. Liberals are unhappy generally because they believe they have been persecuted. A left-wing woman may attribute her unhappiness to American society's patriarchy or misogyny. She therefore feels oppressed. He also argues that the more left-wing blacks will attribute his or her unhappiness to racism. He has noticed that black conservatives have a much happier disposition than left-wing blacks. He's also found that a cheerful black caller to his radio program is almost always a conservative. Near the end of his commentary, he gives a personal example. His father, an Orthodox Jew, wrote his college senior thesis on the subject of anti-Semitism in America. His father was well aware of bigotry in this country, but still reminded Dennis Prager and his brother that American Jews are the luckiest Jews in history because they're Americans. Prager says, "I therefore never knew what it was like to walk around thinking most of the people I met hated me. That alone contributed to my happiness." He correctly concludes that unhappy Americans on the right blame the problems inherent to life and blame themselves. Unhappy Americans on the left blame America. This simple formula explains so much. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13. Samson now playing. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And Kelly and Jeremy in studio with us. And again, we've been talking about First Liberty and also, of course, talking about the gun control debate, but also the broader issue. The first article we have here, Will Gun Control Debate Break America? One on the CNN town hall meeting, Are Gun-Free Zones Safe? And then also one we've posted on the legacy of Billy Graham, and we may come back to that just a little bit later, but let's take some of the phone calls based upon this whole debate that is taking place right now. So we'll head to North Carolina. Joe, what would you like to add to our conversation today? Well, maybe I put Joe on hold here. We'll get to Joe in just a minute. And let's go to Matt in Georgia. Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks. Glad for taking my call. A couple things. One, on the gun control, I'm not willing to ask permission to exercise a right, and that's what a permit is. You know, Geraldo Rivera last night said even, he wants obviously more gun laws, but he admitted gun laws wouldn't make a difference. So let's be effective if we're going to do something. Let's not just do something in the name of doing something, but be effective. And the second thing is, you hear him talking about mental health and, the president, which I'm a supporter of, talking about open facilities, and we got to be careful with that. I mean, do we want to lock away veterans because they saw horrific stuff on the battlefield? Do we want to lock away the loner kid at school or the elderly? Or eventually, if they take it too far, they'll be locking away people just because they disagree with you.
Yep.
And we don't want to give up freedoms.
That's why, again, you need to support things like First Liberty to stand for your rights. But, let's take them one at a time. First of all, your point about whether these would work. we've mentioned this before, Kelly, but I thought I'd mention it one more time because we have posted it on the website. When Senator Marco Rubio asserted that no new gun laws would have prevented any of the recent mass shootings, all sorts of people got upset, people with their hair on fire. So Glenn Kessler at the Washington Post, who is hardly an NRA apologist, just about the opposite, if anything, did what is called a fact check. And does this deserve 4 Pinocchios, 3 Pinocchios? It deserved none. He said essentially he had to agree with Marco Rubio and did it somewhat with a little bit of a lament, because there is such an argument right now that if we just do this, then we will not have mass shootings. But that's the first point. And the second one, of course, is the issue of mental health. I mean, in some respects, we need to do more to help those with mental health. Not everybody that is having any kind of mental problem is a danger to others. Right. Oftentimes, they're more a danger to themselves. But that being said, we do notice a pattern there as well. So that's not one size fits all, but it's one of many answers to this question, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it is a very complicated issue. I mean, obviously, sin is complicated, and what's going on in our culture and our society is complicated. But I would sort of separate things into long-term solutions and short-term solutions. I think a long-term solution, the ultimate long-term solution, is there needs to be a revival, and people need to come to know the Lord, and this won't happen. But in the other long-term solutions that are out there, there are things like, and this is sort of in between, I guess you'd say, better background check information, making sure that when that the states are actually forced to share the information about somebody who's been committed, somebody who's got a gun violence situation. I mean, all that needs to be, the database needs to be a good database on these things. And then having a better, system. And again, maybe as Jeremy mentioned earlier, it could be an ability to go in and get a restraining order when you have some of these local situations where they can't own a gun because they're in a situation where it's not safe. Again, there have to be protections, because just like anything else, I mean, that's a Second Amendment right. So it's not taken away unless there's a burden of proof that has to be met that's strong. And it can't be, we're just guessing or we hope or whatever. But those are all things. But I think the thing that has to be done immediately is security, because nobody is going to say, I don't think, even the gun control extremists are not going to say that, well, we'll stop everybody by our little gun control measures. Okay, they're really going to probably stop nobody. But even if they think they're going to stop, people will slip through the system, all their systems, and all the other systems we have. How do you protect the kids? And that's what we need to do first, is provide the security. What is the solution there? And then you work towards the long-term solutions. But I think there's a whole panoply of things. There's mental health, there's the information, there's the culture, and then there's just basic security of whether you have a person like an officer that's in the school, whether you have the teachers who are trained with concealed carry. I heard a unique idea today of just some of the officers being that's where their office is. They still do their regular work. They're just there, and they're like a presence there. And you just spread them around the different schools. So, I mean, there's all kinds of creative ideas people come up with. But the interim, immediate, let's stop this from happening, it has to be a security solution.
Yeah, look, this is why Point of View becomes a very helpful resource to everybody who listens to it, because we're not telling you what to think. This show equips you to think about a variety of things. And one of the things that I thought, and it just triggered my memory of this as Matt was talking to us here, was that there was a lot, especially on social media, people were really upset at the beginning of the year with anybody who dared to say, my thoughts and prayers are with the people of Parkland, Florida.
The
right?
shaming, prayer shaming.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was always the rejoinder to that was, we just got to do something. You can't have this thoughts and prayers anymore. You got to do something about it all. Well, the reality is, you're saying you've got to do something about it is the exact equivalent of my thoughts and prayers are with you. It's just coming from a different. Are you actually doing something? No, of course not. You think you're doing something because you've all of a sudden activated some social network, or at least released your steam on your social page of some sort, but you've not actually done anything at all. And the same is really very true of some of the protests that are going on right now, including some of the students. They feel like they're doing something, but they may actually be being used. And I hope they're not. I hope that this is very sincere. But I worry that there is a political campaign afoot. So I would encourage the listeners to think through these things. Take in that media very, very carefully, because you're being targeted for an argument. Understand what that argument that is coming to your doorstep is, and know how to be able to respond to it eloquently.
Again, some of the articles we've posted are that. My commentary next week gets into the instant background checks and some of those kinds of things as well. And we'll go to Florida this time. Jeannie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What's your point of view?
Hey, I've got two things. First of all, that man that did that travesty checked out, and he knew that that was the only school in the area that was gun-free. People like that will go to a place they know they're not going to get shot. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I wanted to say is we're becoming more and more, and we don't even realize it, but our population does not realize that they are giving up everything they ever had in the way of freedom. We'll become like North Korea, where one person is dictating and controlling because those people don't even have food to eat. They have to work. Everything that they get goes back to the government, and the government gives them what they want them to have or don't want them to have. They have no freedom at all. Do we want to be like that?
And you don't want to be like Venezuela or North Korea. We're far away from that right now. But, you know, that gun-free zone, when we've had John Lott on there, he points out that the shooter there in Aurora, Colorado, actually identified a number of different movie theaters and targeted one, literally drove past others to go to the one that he knew prohibited anyone from having a concealed carry. And he uses many other examples like that. The shooter that was I think Southern Carolina. South Carolina was also the same kind of thing, went past some of the other opportunities. And so you've got some situations that we can demonstrate where when an individual knows it's going to be a gun-free zone, that is something that keeps them from there. And I've said before, even if you didn't have an officer in every school, if you just had a sign that says this area is protected by an armed officer, I think there would be much less of a problem, because deterrence really works, doesn't it?
It does. And in fact, there's one other thing I know I mentioned last time I was on this, and I actually heard, I hadn't heard anybody talk about it, and I actually heard President Trump mention it. I was like, I'll be darned. He actually did it. I think he's got good instincts. And that is shaming.
Yes.
Instead of sort of glorifying that these guys get all this publicity, there should be a lot of statements about what a coward this person was that goes in with a gun and shoots a bunch of defenseless people, that a real man, because these are all males, a real man doesn't do that. A real man would fight you hand to hand or whatever. And you just start shaming. I heard the president yesterday say these are cowards. So if there's people there with guns or not, and it's the first time I've heard anybody begin to shame and speak against it in a way that would discourage, and we will have less of it if that talk continues.
Again, shaming and no longer having gun-free zones. Those are at least a few ideas on the table. We'll take some more right after this.
From PureFlix comes Samson, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges. From his anointing to betrayal to redemption.
My name is Samson, and you will face the wrath of God.
Samson, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at samson.movie.
Missing a day of Point of View is like Samson losing his hair. Now stay with me. Without his hair, Samson was weak, and ultimately he lost his sight. Without Point of View, you miss out on encouraging news, stories of how God is using Christians to make a difference. Instead of being strengthened, you get discouraged. And Point of View helps you see places to get involved, opportunities to apply your God-given gifts for good. Never miss a program, a Viewpoints commentary, an important action item when you download the Point of View radio app, free from Google Play or iTunes. Take out your phone right now and download the Point of View radio app. See the difference you can make.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, we're talking about a number of issues, some of the cultural change taking place in our society, the gun control debate, and let's open it up also for those of you that want to talk about the legacy of Billy Graham. That is the fourth article we've posted here today. We've talked a little bit about that on our Millennial Roundtable, spent quite a bit of time the other day talking with William Martin, who is the biographer of Billy Graham. And I might also mention that, Jeremy, you've got that article that appeared in the Washington Post. And if people didn't hear that yesterday, William Martin, actually intended that article to be titled Graham's Children. And the Washington Post decided instead to talk about the kids that were drugs, divorce, and all that. And he was very upset about how they changed the title of his column. All of us around the table know how that sometimes happens. And there was also a very positive comment that Ruth Graham, that is the younger Ruth, the daughter, had made that they took out as well. So for those of you that feel like he was being overly critical of Billy Graham, well, has been reporting, but was telling some stories about that as well. So nevertheless, I just thought I'd mention that. So if you got some comments about Billy Graham, and there have been some pretty negative comments, but most of them have been positive, and some people have said that they owe their ministry and their lives to him. Billy Graham is in the presence of all sorts of other people that probably came to know the Lord as a result, and so that is another topic. If you would like to address it, 1-800-351-1212. But getting back to the cultural issues, let's go to North Carolina this time. Jim, I think you want to talk about what's going on in our schools.
Indeed. Billy Graham would have had a big impact on it, actually. Since 1962, we've stopped teaching moral values in the school. We stopped teaching what it means to be an American, what it is to be proud of this nation. I mean, we have millennials that probably 45% of them don't even want to be in this nation, but they were raised here. The Word of God's not been taught. We need to get back to basics, and that's what's been missing. That's why we have the issues we have. 50 years ago, we didn't have it.
Well, again, we've talked about the fact that you oftentimes would have kids that would bring their rifles to school, go shooting or hunting afterwards, and we had guns, sometimes loaded guns in the schools, and did not have this problem. And we have this interesting, kind of bizarre set of circumstances in which gun violence, violent crimes have dropped precipitously over the last 2 decades. And yet, during that same period of time, from Columbine on, most of the mass shootings have taken place. So, Kelly, what about this idea of moral values? Again, since I have 2 lawyers here, can't teachers teach moral values? Can't they teach about the Bible? Can't we do some things, even given the Supreme Court decisions in the schools? What can we do?
Yeah, they can do that. Obviously, they can teach moral values. They can even, many of the school districts are providing Bible elective classes, which that's totally fine. Supreme Court said it's fine. It's being done all over the country. And there are great programs out there. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that they can do. There really are no restrictions for, teaching about these kind of things. And so that's not a problem, but it's a matter of will and whether people are going to insist upon this.
Jeremy, what about this? Because some of our civil libertarian friends make it sound like if you mention the word God or Jesus or even the word religion in the classroom, it's like pornography or something like that. I mean, we've got to change the mindset that says in a free society, in an open society, we should be allowed to talk about religious values even in a public arena, shouldn't we?
And we certainly need to have that space to be able to do that. And the people who carry the most freedom within these schools, whether they know it or not, are the students themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And students have the opportunity to be able to use the classroom facilities just like other student groups do, to be able to have their religious discussions in those classrooms. They can reference their faith during their assignments at that they take home and bring back, papers, assignments, speeches, whatever it might be. Whatever those assignments are, they can mention their faith within them. They can mention it as a part of their classroom discussion. So if they're talking today about these school shootings, they can certainly bring to bear the moral impetus that informs their opinion as a part of that discussion, and should not face any kind of negative consequences for doing so. And if they do, they should call us at firstliberty.org. so that we know how to be able to better serve you and all that. And unless our students are going to be willing to be able to take up those rights and employ them, we're going to lose them even more quickly than we are seeing it right now.
Yeah, I'd say use them or lose them. And again, contact First Liberty if you have a case. Again, as we get closer to these graduation ceremonies and things like that, I know that gets to be a pretty busy time around First Liberty because of all sorts of individuals that are convinced you just can't say anything about religion, God, or anything else. Let's go back to the phones. So, Mary, I think you want to testify about the schools, Billy Graham, and so you have the floor.
All right, I just want to thank Billy Graham's family and Billy Graham so much all the time. I don't think people realize all the time that he put out there to profess the word of our Lord. And I just thank them so much, and I just hope the family just goes straight forward and continues on. And I think we as believers, if we say we truly love the Lord, we should be out there spreading the gospel so much because our Lord is precious. And in the schools, yes, maybe if teachers spent a little more time listening to the student and not just pinpoint one out, because there's always a few involved. My own son tells me about it, and it's heart-wrenching because I think we as parents, as adults, as believers, we need to stand up for so much, and it's so true what the one broadcaster just said before, and that's why I'm calling. He said something so precious. We are reaping what we sowed. We said to take out, we allowed them taking out the 10 Commandments, prayer out of school. If you don't teach our children about our Lord, what hope do they have? What encouragement? And we're letting them do all the wrong things, and do we even take the time to watch how much time are they spending on that computer? How much time are they spending on that phone? The parents should not even allow this expensive phone and computer. Let them do more work in the yard, at home, and you'll see their whole mindset change. They'll have a willingness to come home, and they'll feel like someone. And let them just get into the Word. Every family should have Bible study every day. Instead, again, I can't say it enough, we say we're believers and that we love our Lord, but what are we doing? What are we standing up for? And then we're complaining about the guns and all these things. There's criminals out there that could sell it out of their own trunk. And so, again, we're looking at the wrong thing. We're not listening into, keying in to the right thing that has to be looked at. Why did that boy do that? What happened? What happened way back when? And to help the students now, listen to them. Listen to them. Pay attention to them. Again, we're not even facing into the right thing. And I just want to thank the broadcasters and everyone on this station for really standing up and talking about our Lord. And we should just be so glad. I hope there's more people out there that want to be like Billy Graham and spread the right gospel, the right thing, and the truth. The people don't want to hear the truth, but the right thing. Spend more time with the family. And I just thank you for this time.
Mary, I appreciate your phone call. You talked about the sacrifice of the Graham family. Of course, we shared a little bit about what Ruth Graham had to do to raise the kids because Billy Graham was out here. 77 million people saw him preach in person, and that number's probably a little bit low. 215 million people more watched his crusades on television. Never have been anybody like that. And again, it may be, I'll go around the round table real quickly. Billy Graham understood the value of technology. He was one of the first evangelists to be on television. You guys next week will be going to the National Religious Broadcasters. When I've been there, the Billy Graham organizations talked about how to use social media to spread the gospel. We have the great technology that I know you use at First Liberty. And that's something that we maybe learned a little bit from Billy Graham about using the greatest technology to expose the world to the gospel.
Absolutely. He was definitely on the cutting edge. And just a lot of things he did. They would have people who came and made a decision there at the crusade. They had a system so set up that the next morning they would receive in the mail a letter. So they were really very intentional about what they were doing and very thoughtful. And, it's incredible how the Lord blessed that ministry and still is blessing that ministry with Franklin Graham and what he's doing.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some phone calls. We'll see if we can get to as many of those calls as possible. If not, you certainly can join us next week because we're going to have some great opportunities to in a podcast that we'll do in the morning, which those of you in Dallas can have a chance to hear. We'll be talking about some really important things, but then we'll also have Lee Strobel in studio as we talk about the case for miracles. Of course, we've talked about the case for Christ and the case for creation, but we'll be talking with him. Next week, we'll, of course, get into many other issues. So as you listen to Point of View, hope you will find the articles we've posted. Maybe even click on that button that says donation, because we would certainly appreciate your financial support. We'll come back and take some more calls right after this.
President Trump has been reversing destructive policies and replacing radical appointees put in place by his predecessor. He missed one opportunity in nominating Hy Feldblum to serve a third term, a 5-year term, on the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. The Conservative Review calls her the previous administration's most radical sexual identity movement leader. The EEOC was created under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to combat workplace discrimination. The agency is often called upon to adjudicate struggles between our constitutional freedom of religion and gay rights in the workplace. It tends not to wait for the courts, but to push ahead with its own ideological preferences. Conservative Review's editor Daniel Horowitz describes today's EEOC as the tip of the spear of the radical racial sexual identity movements. He points out that they apply the laws unequally for classes of citizens loved by the American left at the expense of the classes out of favor with the political elites. Hy Feldblum's renomination is terrible news for all businesses that operate according to religious convictions. Ms. Feldblum, an open lesbian and former Georgetown University law professor, has publicly advocated that sex discrimination in current law be redefined to include sexual orientation and gender identity. She was a lead architect of President Obama's transgender directive for public schools. She was an author of ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. She believes that religious liberty exemptions should be extremely narrow, and famously answered a question about the rights of Christians to hire employees of their own choosing with the phrase, "Gays win, Christians lose." She wrote, "We are in a zero-sum game. A gain for one side necessarily entails a corresponding loss for the other side. In these questions," she continued, "I am convinced society should come down on the side of protecting the liberty of LGBT people. The administration should withdraw this nomination and find a more mainstream candidate for the EEOC." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Kelly and Jeremy in studio with us today, and we're talking about all sorts of issues. But before we go any further, and I'll take a few phone calls if we have time, did want to talk about First Liberty, and we've talked about the resources. I want to also marshal some prayer requests right now because you have a number of cases going before the Supreme Court. And, of course, the chances of getting taken by the Supreme Court sometimes seem like the chances of getting hit by lightning. I mean, there are so many cases, whether they take 70 or 80, and there's so many considerations. But you have some cases being considered right now and being considered over the next couple of weeks. And so, Kelly, give us an update on some of those cases, because aren't there about a half a dozen of your cases that could go to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I'd say right now, pray right now for the Marianne Sauce case. The justices are meeting today to make a decision on that case. And so this is the woman who was actually ordered by police not to pray in her own home. And literally,
you can't make this up. This is just amazing.
That's the question.
Yes.
I mean, the question in the case is, can police tell someone that they can't pray in their own home with impunity? Even if, and this is part of the stipulated facts in this case, even if there is no reason given or no reason to justify it. It was so outrageous that the Court of Appeals said, well, this is just so outrageous that there's not been a case directly on this, and so maybe the police didn't know. So we're going to let them off the first time. We're like, what? It's insane. So hopefully we can get the court, but pray right now because this is literally today. The other 5 are the Coach Kennedy case, which many people are aware of. This is of course, Coach Kennedy was fired because he went to his knee after the football game for 15 to 20 seconds by himself and gave a silent prayer. That we'll be filing, I think, within the next 70 or so days. The Bladensburg Veterans Memorial, which has been up for almost 100 years.
Cut off the arms of the cross?
That was part of the discussion during the oral argument was maybe we need to cut the arms of the cross off so we can take care of any offense. Instead, the Federal Court of Appeals said it's unconstitutional. And
so just tear it down.
So if
and tear all the crosses down, right?
I mean, it's not only to that, but that district, that Court of Appeals within its district is Arlington National Cemetery. So they would have to go in and tear down all the freestanding crosses, the large crosses there in Arlington, which would just be unheard of. That will probably, we'll see. I mean, I'm going to guess that'll be probably filed in the Supreme Court in the next 3 to 4 months, be my best guess. And then we have some, the Jackson County and Rowan County, North Carolina, Jackson County, Michigan, both about whether you can have a county commissioner say a prayer to open their meeting. This goes back to the founding of the country. You thought it was okay, but now it's been declared unconstitutional by the Fourth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit said, no, it is constitutional. There's a huge circuit split on that. And then there's the Livingston Christian case, which is really, what the case is about is, can a city say that your Christian school can exist nowhere in the city limits?
Yes.
Or is that a violation of religious freedom? So these are all cases at the Supreme Court, and Jeremy, did I leave one out? Those are at least did I get 6 or did I miss one of them?
I think you got them all.
Yeah. And I might just mention that, of course, we've been watching the other case of Jack Phillips and the bakery. You and I have said before that they may just make this a very narrow ruling, which then would mean that the one we've talked about in Oregon would be very important. And so Aaron and Melissa Klein, that case might then be one that finally resolves that. And so we've got all...
And that case is actually going to be appealed to the Oregon Supreme Court next week as well.
There you go.
So that'll be the next phase of that case. And really what's interesting in this case now is to evaluate what happens when the government casts you outside of polite society. When they pronounce that you have violated the law for simply abiding by your religious beliefs, the rest of society feels like the constraints are off of them as well, and they can call you every manner of name in the book. And frankly, we've got a stack of social media posts that we've printed off from Aaron and Melissa, whether it's some they've received on Facebook or through the email or whatever it was, that is just absolutely awful. I mean, things like, I would be justified to climb into the back of your shop and shoot you all in the head. They've had their property vandalized. They've had their home broken into. This is what happens when the government fails to protect its citizens and their right to be able to live peaceably according to their religious convictions, and instead turns people on themselves to say, no, you're either going to believe as the government tells you to believe, or we're going to punish you as anathema to the society.
And again, a conversation we had earlier in the week with John Whitehead, when the government can compel you to do something, to say something, to use your artistic talent, that does look a little bit like what we talked about with one of our other callers, a little bit more like North Korea. Lots of times that's hyperbole, but when the government can compel you to do things, Kelly, that's really something we've never seen before, right?
Especially when in these cases, a number of these cases now that are at the Supreme Court, it's about whether they can compel you to say something that violates your religious beliefs and your conscience. I mean, that is the ultimate intolerance and the ultimate loss of freedom. I mean, you're no longer free. You're a slave of the government. Once they can say, we want you to say this. You will say this even though you don't believe this. Very dangerous. So I would encourage, if they don't get these updates, people can get them for free. They can just go to firstliberty.org, and at the top it says Get Updates. Right. Click on it. And because these things are going to be happening pretty fast over the next, 4, 5, 6 months. But we might even know something on Monday on what happened today as the justices are voting today in secret.
Yeah, this is a good time to mention that when it comes to Aaron and Melissa Klein's case and Jack Phillips as well, we're big fans of the ACLU because on their website today they have a sentence on there that I think is just absolutely brilliant. They say freedom of expression for ourselves requires freedom of expression for others. Now, I have a hard time understanding why the ACLU would espouse such wisdom and not be defending Jack Phillips.
Yes.
And instead, they're actually suing Jack Phillips. It doesn't make any sense to me at all, but the sentiment is actually correct that if we're going to protect freedom of expression, if we want freedom of expression, if you want freedom of expression, if those of you who are listening want to be able to express your religious beliefs, if these students at the CNN town hall want to be able to have their freedom of expression, it starts by defending the freedom of expression for people with which they disagree.
Wow. If you go to firstliberty.org, upper right-hand corner, click on that, and it has a section called Resources. So that's one of the resources that is available. And you have an opportunity to get resources related to churches, military, ministries, religious liberty, schools, workplace. So that's pretty good material. And if they want to contact you, because we're getting into the season where we have graduation ceremonies, and we always have school districts that tell us you just can't mention God in that particular graduation ceremony, or you can't have a baccalaureate. How can they contact you, Kelly?
It's easy. They can just go to firstliberty.org, and there's a form to fill out and all that, or they can call us, either one, at 972-941-4444. Or they can just go to the Facebook page. They can go to the Twitter. I mean, they can follow this in a lot of different ways, and that's an easy way sometimes to get a discussion going on these things. You'll remember when Joy Behar came out and said that Mike Pence was somehow mentally ill because he thought he tried to hear from Jesus. We immediately started posting memes up that showed like Barack Obama saying he was waiting to hear from the Lord, and then we showed Joy Behar's comment, and then we showed George Washington, and then it's a great education effort, and that's something you can grab and like share with other people and remind people that this country was built on religious freedom. We're not ashamed of our faith in this country, and hopefully that will embolden people to be more open with their faith and to not feel like somehow it's like the new pornography that has to be hidden.
Well, again, thank you both for being here. Let me just mention on Monday we have Ryan Anderson. His new book is When Harry Became Sally, on the transgender issue. Then we have in studio with us Lee Strobel, and all through the week we're going to be covering lots of important issues. If you'd like to know more about First Liberty, like to find the articles, you can find them at pointofview.net. Hope you click on the button that says Donate. We certainly do depend upon your financial gifts. Have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. See you back here on Monday.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.